Of Chrematology, Joyce and Money. Der Geist, der aus der Ornamentik der Banknoten spricht. Walter Benjamin, Kapitalismus als Religion. Money makes the round go a world, as Joyce might have said. Certainly Finnegan's Wake, his book of wandering and return, of a loss and a gain, is awash with money. There are English pounds, schellings, and pence, American bison nickels, French louis, Russian kopecks, German grosch, and dog marks, woodpiles of halfpennies, the sylvan coin, designed for Ireland by William Wood, circulate along guineas, 10-pound cricklers and tin-panned cracklers. Money crinkles, clunks, and rings throughout this novel in which nothing's free. This novel in which roads have tolls, museums entry fees. Belsham solicits, "Tink you, tank you, silver plate." Cathy barks, "Tip." Before he'll jute anything, Mutt must be bribed with trink gilt. On receiving this, he shows him selver-enqueued petite peas of pecuniar interest, pellets that make the tom-tummy's payroll, then demands the cost of tram fare. Money is the prerequisite for the passage of signs. You will never have post in your pocket unless you have brass on your plate. If Finnegan's Wake's very content is, as its first page reminds us, retailed, then the space of recirculation in which this retailing occurs is, as Jones suggests in Book 1, Chapter 6, an economantarchy. Our aim in this chapter is simply to read Finnegan's Wake by following the chains of coinage that litter the text, of credit, credibility, credence, debt, indebtedness, reneging on debt, bankruptcy, profit, loss, inflation, deflation, and counterfeit. Finnegan's Wake opens with a prophetic allusion to the Wall Street crash of 1929, the fall of a once Wall Street old par. And we would like to view the text as if it were some vast financial system. We will try and establish what we call a chrematology in this economantarchy. That is, pick out the monetary logic in Joyce's text. Our deeper, darker purpose in all this is not just to show that literature is haunted by economics in the manner of classical Marxism and contemporary Marxist mannerism. Rather, our hypothesis is that in Joyce and elsewhere, where Joyce might be seen as the index for and elsewhere of absolutely modern literary, visual, and musical art, economics is raised to the level of cultural form. For us, artworks are aspects of an agon as to the irreducible determination of contemporary life by economics, engaging us in a process of reflection that might, at best, achieve some distance from the fact of that determination. Joyce himself, of course, had a strange and intense relationship with money. His parents had been rich, but met with financial ruin. His mother would pawn furniture to send James money while he lived in Paris. Continually poor, he nonetheless retained expensive tastes, taking his family to eat in the best restaurants when they couldn't pay the rent on their accommodation, tipping theatre ushers £10 when the ticket had cost less than £1. It is almost as though he willed himself into debt. He borrowed incessantly. He liked to boast that he owed money to every single person he knew. His situation is reflected in that of Ulysses' Stephen Dedalus, who, when asked by DC whether he could say of himself, "I paid my way," runs through a mental list of everyone to whom he is indebted. Mulligan, £9, Curran, 10 guineas, McCann, 1 guinea, Fred Ryan, 2 shillings, Temple, 2 lunches, Russell, 1 guinea, Cousins, 10 shillings, Bob Reynolds, half a guinea, Curler, 3 guineas, Mrs. McKernan, 5 weeks' board. For DC, not owing is a measure of one's subjectivity, one's sovereignty. The Englishman can boast this sovereignty precisely because he can say, "I paid my way." For DC, this is not unconnected to the fact that England never let in the Jews, a race, as far as anti-Semites such as DC are concerned, of usurers and wanderers. Stasis and self-sufficiency are the linchpins of DC's credo. Stephen falls very short of meeting this credo's terms, and so did Joyce, an exile living on perpetual credit, extended against or guaranteed by some vague promise that he'd one day write a masterpiece and become rich. What better place to discuss this theme than Trieste, the city described by Joyce as Europicola? Is it a more Joycean city than Dublin? Obviously not, but it is intriguing to entertain the thought. As Joyce said, Trieste ate my liver, or Trieste état mon livre. In Jan Morris's clear, still prose, Trieste becomes many things. A crepuscular, melancholy city swept by the Bora wind and enwrapped in an ecstasy of the poignant. The capital of nowhere, of wistful meditation. A Triesticity located at the intersection of the cultural plate tectonics of Latinity, Germanity, and Slavicity. The place where the young Freud tried to locate the testicles of eels, from where Adolf Eichmann dragged his unexpungible guilt away to South America, and which was described by Filippo Tommaso Marinetti as La Nostra Bella Polveriera, our beautiful powder magazine. But above all, Trieste is a money town, the port of Vienna, a place of trade, of human and inhuman cargo, of capital, of profit, and, since 1918, of loss. The monumental Habsburg structures of the Piazza Unita and the shoreline simply testify to the wealth that poured through Trieste. Who knows, but Joyce's errant, economantarchic preoccupations might have been better served had he set Ulysses in Trieste, rather than Dublin. But what is money? Many things. It is, of course, the coins and notes rattling in our pockets, as well as the piles of real and virtual stuff lying in banks, or the smart money that tends toward disappearance and increasing immateriality, being shuffled electronically along the vectors of the financial networks. This might serve as an empirical definition, but what is the logic of the concept of money? The core of money is trust and promise. I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of, on the British pound. The in God we trust of the US dollar. The BCE, ECB, EZB, EKT, EKP of the European Central Bank that runs like a Franco-Anglo-Germano-Greco-Finno-Joycean cipher across the top of every euro note. In other words, the legitimacy of money is based on a sovereign act, or a sovereign guarantee that the money is good, that it is not counterfeit. Money has a promissory structure, with an entirely self-referential logic. The money promises that the money is good. The acceptance of the promise is the acceptance of a specific monetary ethos, a specific yet often flexible monetary geography. This ethos, this circular money promising that the money is good, is underwritten by sovereign power as its transcendent guarantee. It is essential that we believe in this power, that the sovereign power of the bank inspires belief, that the Fed has cred, as it were. Credit can operate only on the basis of credence and credibility, of an act of fidelity and faith, of confidence. The transcendent core of money is an act of faith, of belief. The legitimacy of money is based on the fiction of sovereign power, and in this connection one can speak of a sort of monetary patriotism, which is particularly evident in attitudes in the United States to the dollar, particularly to the sheer materiality of the bill, and in the United Kingdom's opposition to the euro, and to the strange cultural need for money marked with the Queen's head. In a deep sense, money is not. It exists empirically, but it is not essentially there at all. All money is what the French call escroquerie, swindling. It is a virtual, or at best conceptual object. It is, in the strictest Platonic definitional sense, forget Baudrillard, a simulacrum, something that materializes an absence, an image for something that doesn't exist. Money is delusionary, and faith in money is a form of collective psychosis. In the godless wasteland of global capitalism, money is our only metaphysics, our only ontotheology, the only transcendent subject in which we truly must have faith. It is this faith that we celebrate, we venerate, in commodity fetishism. Adorno makes the point powerfully. Marx defines the fetish character of the commodity as the veneration of the thing made by oneself, which, as exchange value, simultaneously alienates itself from producer to consumer. This is the real secret of success. It is the mere reflection of what one pays in the market for the product. The consumer is really worshipping the money that he himself has paid for the ticket to the Toscanini concert. He has literally made the success which he reifies and accepts as an objective criterion, without recognizing himself in it. But he has not made it by liking the concert, but rather by buying the ticket. Marx describes money as the universal form of equivalence by virtue of which capitalism can exist, that goods can be exchanged. In the imperial space of what Hart and Negri describe as networks of sovereignty, money becomes the general form of life. It constitutes the fact of empire, and money's absence defines empire's opposite. The multitude are poor. For us, here and now, money has no outside. There is no pure form of economy, no barter system, somehow unsullied by money's circulation. You are always already locked into a monetary ethos, part of a contour line upon a financial cartography. There is only the sully of money. All money is dirty. From a Freudian perspective, money is deeply anal. It is shit rather than bread. You can use it to buy shit, and a general obsession with money is why people talk so much shit. For the infant, the little Freudian child, shit is money, which is why it is so proud of its soft, smelly currency. In the proto-Lockean world of anal sadism, shit is the first form of property ownership. The labor theory of value begins in your diapers. Let's not forget, Freud is a kind of anti-Midas, where for Midas everything natural was transformed into gold, for Freud all that glitters is transformed into shit. Freud touches a familiar object and suddenly, pooh, you wonder where the smell is coming from. Our favorite Freudian neurotic, the rat man, is obsessed with money, with repaying a misconceived debt. He is also highly aware of money's dirtiness, and, anally obsessed, his fears of rat torture, in which a rat eats into one's anus, verbally linked to shame about his Spielratte, his father's gambling debts. His very neurosis is described in economic terms by Freud, who writes, "In his obsessional deliria, he had coined himself a regular rat currency. Little by little he translated into this language the whole complex of money interests which centered around his father's legacy to him." Of course, money is also indexed to desire, and there is a strong association between money and the dépense of jouissance sexuelle, and not only when you have to pay for it. Money is power, sex is power, power is sexy, and so is money. And let's not forget the profound link between psychoanalysis and payment. With the exception of Karl Marx, were there ever creatures on earth more obsessed with money than psychoanalysts? Of course, they are right, and the core of the analytic pact is a monetary union, a monetary act of trust. One has to pay whatever it is you can afford, otherwise the analysis begins to lose credibility. One cannot do analysis for free. The faith and trust of the transference, which is the key to the analytic relationship, is guaranteed by money. The promissory trust of therapy is secured through monetary exchange. Jouissance brings us back by a commodious vicus of recirculation to Joyce. Lacan, who was unnaturally obsessed by Finnegan's Wake throughout the 1970s, writes, "Joyce is in relation to joy, that is, jouissance, written in la langue, that is, English. This enjoicing, this jouissance, is the only thing one can get from the text. This is the symptom." For Lacan, it is the joy in Joyce that enjoys, just as it is the Freud in Freud that freudsick. This is what one feels in reading Joyce. Read Finnegan's Wake without trying to understand. One usually reads it because one can feel the presence of the writer's jouissance. It is the sheer pressure of this presence that suffocates and oppresses the reader of Finnegan's Wake because, as is well known, Lacanian jouissance is not pleasure, but suffering, an excitation or excess that is too much for the organism to bear. Enjoyment, or what Joyce calls joyicity, is not enjoyable. Perhaps this is why many people think that the Wake is unreadable. Is it not rather simply unbearable? Its seeming trifles are traces of psychic pain. One might go a little further with Lacan and say that jouissance is the kernel of psychotic suffering, a kernel that is non-analyzable and which cannot be symbolized. For Lacan, it is this writing of psychotic jouissance that Joyce enacts. Joyce manages to bring the symptom to the power of language, yet without rendering it analyzable. A very common behaviour of psychotics is the forging of neologisms or fresh linguistic coinages, and to this extent the writing of Finnegan's Wake might be viewed as some vast psychotic case history. Of course, the psychotic suffering here is not just that of Joyce, although Lacan asks, when does one start to be mad? Was Joyce mad? But also that of his daughter Lucia, whose psychotic sayings and diagrams litter the literature of Finnegan's Wake. In a wonderful formulation, Lacan remarks that Joyce was désabonné à l'inconscient, namely that he abandoned or gave up his subscription to the symbolic order. In ugly Lacanese, this means that Joyce affirmed the lack in the big other and experienced the jouissance of the real. In more everyday parlance, we might say that Joyce progressively shed the legitimating narrative conventions and expectations of the 19th century realist novel. For some, literature might be understood as the draining of the excitation of jouissance, the Zuider Sie of the unconscious in Freud, or the Dionysian womb of being in Nietzsche. Literature symbolizes or gives beautiful Apollinian form to the chaos of desire. As such, Finnegan's Wake is literature in reverse, a writing of the symptom that attempts to attend to the clamour of jouissance, that subtends literary creation and which cannot be dammed up. This reversal is mirrored linguistically in Lacan's punning distinction between language, la langue, and la langue. If the symbolic is the order of language, which is given priority in Lacan's earlier structuralist-inspired work, then la langue is his nickname for an experience of language that is itself a form of jouissance and sheer material affect that precedes and resists symbolization. What I put forward by writing la langue as one word is that by which I distance myself from structuralism. We want to read the planned Babel of Finnegan's Wake as a monetary la langue, a chain of crazy coinage that both subtends and ruins the symbolic universe of literature, reducing letter to litter. Only one town, perhaps, could rival Trieste in its claim as ideal host for this discussion: Dublin. Not Dublin, Ireland, but rather Dublin, Georgia, USA. The city, founded on the river Oconee in Lawrence County by Irish emigrant Peter Sawyer, finds its way into the Wake's first complete sentence, whose second clause reads, "Nor had top Sawyer's rocks by the stream Oconee exaggerated themselves to Lawrence County's gorgios, while they went Dublin their mumper all the time." Top Sawyer's rocks are a formation on the Oconee's banks. Rocks also means both testicles and money. Ocone is the Gaelic for alas. The image here is of mothers wailing as their sons, fruits of their fathers' swollen loins, depart across the waters in an effort to win wealth and status in the new world, to swell their coffers. Joseph Campbell and Henry Morton Robinson, always keen to emphasize the story of the Wake, interpret the passage thus. A successful son of HCE emigrates from east to west, as his father before him. Settling in America, he begets a large progeny and bequeaths to them a decent, even gorgeous, prosperity. Joyce's own son was, of course, Giorgio. Downstream of Top Sawyer's rocks, the biologic and the economic blur together, much as they do in Shakespeare's sonnets, where from fairest creatures we desire increase being both economic profit and physical reproduction. What is Dublin their mumper? Rocks, balls, wealth, world in the sense of place and populace. The town motto of Dublin, Georgia is doubling all the time, and Joyce keeps doubling Dublin into Dublong and Durlbin and Dibling. So many of the Wake's themes are touched on in these 23 words. So too, perhaps, are the workings of the novel's very text. Finnegan's Wake is an accumulative novel, a novel in which characters, events, reports, and interpretations multiply incessantly. Dublin their mumper all the time. Mutt, discussing the relation between printed papier and the signification generated by it, tells Jute, "You need hardly spell me how every word is bound to carry over 80, and 10 top tipsical readings throughout the book of double ends jined." Meaning itself, it seems, is an accumulation. Profit, a return on a text's investment to the tune of 7,000%, of 70. Also, coincidentally, the average return in years on the investment of biological existence. What we have here, then, is a glowing annual report, a multi-level tale of profit. But lurking between the lines of this report is another contradictory one, a tale of loss. To return to our opening 23 words, the Latin exaggerare may mean to pile up, but the English exaggerate suggests that the wealth is overstated, perhaps even non-existent. Hiding inside the mumper of fertile rocks is mumps, an illness that makes men infertile. The book's next sentence shows us not aggrandizement but collapse, the fall of a once Wall Street old par, a reference to Wall Street crashes. The great crash of 1929 was lurking round the corner when Joyce wrote the passage. Values, now as then, have plummeted. One sovereign punned to peachery pence. The opulent, accumulating landscape of Lawrence County gives way to a retreating one whose length lies under liquidation, whose typical inhabitant, living in our midst of debt, will loan a vesta and hire some peat, and sarch the shores her cockles to heat, and she'll do all a turf woman can to piff the business on. The line separating gorgeous bourgeois splendor from frugal poverty, as Joyce knew all too well, is thin. Finnegan's Wake, then, is a tale of two economies, two coexisting ones, one characterized by surplus, profit, wealth, and another characterized by bankruptcy and debt. This is true semantically as well. Alongside a great glut of meanings runs a continual failure to establish any. The unfacts, did we possess them, are too imprecisely few to warrant our incertitude. The evidence givers by Legpole too untrustworthily irreparable. Our notional gullery is now completely complacent, an exegious monument, airily perennious. In the Wake's negational language, sense becomes since. Without, sen, sense, senza. Inquiring becomes unquiring. Fiat, it was thus, becomes fuit. It eluded us, escaped, and eventually perfui. Rubbish. In this Scheherazade of one's 1,001 nightinesses, we are told, that sword of certainty which would indentify the body never falls. The book fails to return its reader's investment with fixed dividends of meaning, instead borrowing a word and begging the question and stealing tinder and slipping like soap, sliding further and further into the red of indeterminacy. Finnegan's Wake is a tale of two economies in more ways than one. Not only do the economy of surplus and that of loss tussle with one another for supremacy, so too do two differing versions of economy itself. We will call these versions economics and chrematistics, respectively. The distinction is borrowed from Aristotle, where, crudely stated, it is the difference between the good, natural economy of the oikos and the bad, artificial economy that arises when money, to chrema, appears on the scene. Derrida, in a fascinating passage from Donner le ton, la fausse monnaie, summarizes Aristotle's distinction between economics and chremastics thus. For Aristotle, it is a matter of an ideal and desirable limit, a limit between the limit and the unlimited, between the true and finite good, the economic, and the illusory and indefinite good, the crematistic. Economics comes from oikos, home, hearth, seat of the family, the household, indeed of all those things that Derrida lists under the proper, the sovereign. And crematistic from to chrema, money, the unlimited exchangeability of goods that occurs when money appears on the scene. The distinction between economy and chrematistics is reflected not only in that between the limited and the unlimited, but also in that between, continuing the above quote, the supposed finiteness of need and the presumed infinity of desire. Once money, to chrema, has appeared on the scene, The infinity of desire will always transcend the finitude of need. Money is the desire of desire itself, a priori unsatisfied by any object one might actually need. Behold the logic of shopping. The fact that Derrida's language recalls that of Levinas, need, desire, finitude, infinity, is perhaps not accidental, for in opposition to an anti-monetary tradition in philosophy that begins with Aristotle and culminates with Marx, recall that a communist society would be a society without the spectrality of money, Levinas is one of the rare thinkers who reserves a privileged place for money in his work. He writes in The Ego and Totality, "Money then does not purely and simply mark the reification of man. It is an element in which the personal is maintained while being quantified. This is what is proper to money and constitutes, as it were, its dignity as a philosophical category." And further on the same page, money allows us to envisage a justice of redemption to be substituted for the infernal or vicious circle of redemption or pardon. We cannot attenuate the condemnation which from Amos II, 6, to the Communist Manifesto has fallen upon money, precisely because of its power to buy man. But the justice which must save us from economy, that is, from the human totality, cannot negate its superior form, where the quantification of man appears, the common measure between men, for which money, whatever be its empirical form, supplies the category. It is indeed shocking to see in the quantification of man one of the essential conditions for justice. But can one conceive of a justice without quantity and without reparation? Connecting this line of thought with Derrida, he continues the passage with a gesture that will be familiar to readers of his work. As soon as there is the monetary sign, and first of all the sign, that is, différance and credit, the oikos is opened and cannot operate its limit. Money, in effect, is deconstruction, opening the closure of the oikos, what Levinas calls totality, to the unrestricted economy of desire where money circulates and where wealth is accumulated or squandered. However, we would like to go a little further and think of deconstruction as a monetary sign. Indeed, to think of money as one of the names for that incalculable excess that precedes any restricted economy of meaning. In this sense, money might even be thought of as a quasi-transcendental structure, rendering the activity of a restricted economy of the proper, both possible and impossible. It is with this thought in mind that one might redescribe grammatology as Chrematology, as a logic of money. Money is a kind of deconstruction, opening the totality of the proper's economy. But is not the reverse of this proposition also plausible, namely that deconstruction is a kind of money? For what is money if not a spectre, namely the spectrality of difference that haunts the real value of the notes and coins in our pockets, the spectrality that has been at the heart of so many of Derrida's texts, particularly his reading of Marx's Political Economy? Doesn't the force of Derrida's argument against what he sees as Marx's essentializing ontology of life, praxis, labor, and the organicism of community entail a commitment to what he coins the ontology of money, and thereby capital itself? What is deconstruction on this account, if not a cipher for capital? Turning back to Joyce, this movement from the oikos to to krema, breaching the possibility of home rule in all senses of the term, occurs constantly in Finnegan's wake. HCE, the patriarch, high up, big, cocky-wocky, sublimissime autocrat, finds himself repeatedly turned inside out. All around side, up, in, and out, down. His private life is made public, subject to speculation. He is tried, fined, bankrupted. He has to pawn his furniture, the landscape of his oikos. It gets auctioned off, that is, assigned value according to how much and how many other people desire it. It becomes currency. He becomes currency himself. People, first blackmailing him and then selling his story, make money from him. From him, they make money. He is coined, stamped, circulated, sent abroad, and then called back again. As a fallen, broken god, Humpty Dumpty or Hump Cumps Ebly Bolly, He becomes a tip, a scrap heap full of items of pecuniary interest, through which other people sift. His fall, a fall into both sin and debt, the German Schuld, combining both these terms, crops up in several guises, makes him oblius autumnasically of his very proprium. It is a fall from the limited propriety of economics into the aneconomic openness of chrematistics. Finnegan's Wake is a retail that is retailed again and again, a story of one sovereign punned to peachery pence, the sovereign economy of meaning punned chromastically into grubby public circulation. This rupture of the limits of economics, which are the limits of the family, hearth, and home rule, makes possible, writes Derrida, the chance for any kind of hospitality, the chance for the gift itself, the chance for the event. Derrida is suggesting here that money is the possibility of a form of aneconomic giving, for a donation without return, for an event. As a long and intriguing footnote to Donner le Temps makes clear, the word event is to be understood in its Heideggerian sense as das Ereignis. Derrida associates money, to Crema, with der Brauch, or usage, to Kreon, which, according to Heidegger, names being as the presencing of the present in early Greek thinking. Thus, the possibility of money, that is to say, the possibility of différance and credit, breaking the restricted economy of finite need, is also the possibility of the gift, of another ethicality of the gift, hospitality. What Joyce calls creed crux ethics might be replaced with a new ethical fict, and here a further series of connections with Levinas's work might be imagined. Finnegan's Wake, like many of Shakespeare's plays, or for that matter, Hergé's Tintin books, abounds in instances of host-guest encounters, often fraught. As hostie, publican perhaps of foreign origin, HCE plays host to people who, turning on him, become an alien host. Mutt, playing host to Jute's Danish invader, trumples from wrath. It also abounds in instances in which a gift is sought, a line of credit opened. One of the primal events of Finnegan's Wake is the encounter in the park between HCE and the cad. The episode is replayed at least twice, in Books 1, Chapters 2 and 4. It is based on a report Joyce found in a regional Irish newspaper, the Connaught Inquirer, which told of how a drunk accosted another man demanding money, and a scuffle followed, after which the other man agreed to lend him some. This small news item caught Joyce's eye, as it echoed a story his own father had told him about being accosted by a tramp, whom John Stanislaus described as a cad, in Phoenix Park one evening. Joyce told Frank Budgeon that these twin events, or rather twin second-hand accounts, form the basis of the novel. In Joyce's versions of the incident, or incidents, the one which pre-repeated itself, HCE plays the lender. In the second, the accoster is described thus: whereupon became friendly, and, saying not, his shirt to tear, to know wanted, joking and knob-carries all aside laying. If his change companion, who stuck still the invention of his strong-box, with a tenacity corroborating their mutual territorial right, happened to have the lutes changed, of a 10-pound crickler about him at the moment, addling that hap so he would pay him back the 6 vicks odd. HCE replies, woo, would you be grossly surprised, Hill, to learn that, as it so happens, I honestly have not such a thing as the loo, as the least chance of a tin-pan crackler anywhere about me at the present moment, but I believe I can see my way, as you suggest, it being Yuletide or Judenfest, and as it's mad nuts, son, for you when it's hatter's hares, mon, for me to advance you something like 4 and 7 pence between hopping and strapping, which you might hust as well have, boy batches to buy JJ and S with. In the first account of the encounter, too, HCE is well-to-do, billowing across the wide expanse of our greatest park, billowing like Antonio's ship's sails, but also, like the overstretched Antonio, bill-owing. The cad asks him for the time, a veiled demand perhaps to hand over his watch, for time is money. HCE asks the cad to credit him in believing that there is no truth in that purest of fib-fib fabrications. What fib-fib fabrication? It seems HCE is giving over more than he was asked for, and in doing so, rendering himself accountable, indebting himself. What's at stake in this encounter? HCE's reputation, certainly, as well as his money, his watch, and his life. The cad's next drink is in the balance too. J, J, and S denotes Jameson's whiskey, but it also denotes James Joyce and Son. There is a sense that Joyce is writing his own history, opening a line of credit, the continuum in which his mumper can be doubled. The cad's words, "I have met with you, bird, too late, or if not, too worm and early," echo those Joyce claims to have said to Yeats on their encounter. "I have met with you too late to help you," folding literary history itself, its struggles of succession and anxieties of influence, in which pretenders to the literary crown are recipients of loans unwillingly made by, and unlikely to be returned to, their predecessors, into the mix. The cad asks for £10 and is offered 4 and 7 pence. The encounter involves not just indebtedness and impropriety, Schuld, but also bartering, like the bartering Heidegger describes when discussing the Anaximander fragment. Beings come, then go back whence they came, thus rendering justice and paying penalty to one another for their injustice, according to the ordinance of time, the fragment tells us. Thus, Heidegger writes, they exhibit a kind of barter system in nature's immutable economy. What, the fragment, an incomplete account from deep, deep in the past, just like the Wake's account of the encounter or encounters, of which Joyce himself only received partial accounts, represents to Heidegger is the dawn of that destiny whereby being, the presencing of what is present, is sent to us. The dawn, that is, of the possibility of the Ereignis, the event, in which the history of the Western world comes to be born, the event of metaphysics. Finnegan's Wake, the book of history, of knowledge, and of ignorance, of rereadings, repetitions, and exegeses, turns around the possibility of the event that might have happened way back in the park, or might happen again, or maybe is continually happening and has never stopped, and round the possibility of understanding it, of finally containing it in thought. In Joyce's text, the event unfolds as possibility, as destiny. It comes round again and again. It is retailed. But what it brings round is not being, presencing, and presence. Rather, it reopens all lines of difference and credit around a monetary sign, an event of economic exchange. It is a tale that is retailed again and again. Joyce's Ereignis is not that of presence, but rather of difference. In it, es gibt Sein becomes es gibt Geld. Joyce believed that Finnegan's Wake would be the last book, the one in which the destiny of literature realized itself. We would argue that he was exactly wrong. Finnegan's Wake is the first book, the very possibility of literature become visible as letter and as litter. One could almost say that it is money, the currency, to crema, that has haunted literature's home and hearth since its beginnings, enabling its various closed economies, the Homeric epic, the picaresque adventure, the 19th century novel, etc., as it lays them waste. The way in which Finnegan's Wake is offered to us is economic. It is not just retailed, but also entailed. The second sentence of the novel's second paragraph tells us this, with a further allusion to Wall Street crashes. The great fall of the off-wall entailed at such short notice the shoot of Finnegan, Earth's solid man. What is the meaning of this word entailed? The Oxford English Dictionary defines entail as the settlement of the succession of a landed estate, so that it cannot be bequeathed at pleasure by any one possessor, thus securing an office, dignity, privilege, to a predetermined order of succession, to carve, sculpt, engrave. It seems we are being treated, right from the outset, to a drama of inheritance engraved in writing. This drama, acted out around the struggles between Shem and Sean, is alluded to as soon as the first paragraph, in which we are told that not yet, but very soon after, had a kid scad attended a bland old Isaac. The reference is to Jacob. Shem is as short for Seamus as Jem is jokey for Jacob, robbing Esau of his inheritance by bringing a lamb to his blind father Isaac while dressed in a hairy sheepskin. Isaac felt the hair, thought Jacob was Esau, and gave him his estate. Wile, trickery, and subterfuge will make themselves felt throughout the struggle. Let's take a closer look at Shem and Sean, these twin representatives of economic poles. Sean is dubbed the post, the one controlling the economy of messages, of signs, of currency. He is wealthy. Shem, by contrast, is poor and constantly in debt. He lives off loan. He is prodigal, a spendthrift, foe to social and business success, making encostive income out of the last of his lathings and writing a blue streak over his Bour's Day shirt. As Bruce, Sean inherits bread and honey. As the Ont, he smokes Hosanna cigars. Shem, as Cassius, inherits shit. As the Gripes, he relies on the Forte herd of Elisabeth, the Poor Relief Law, or, as it was known, the 43rd Statute of Elizabeth. Biographically, Shem corresponds to James, Sean to Stanislaus Joyce. Shem is a penman, a writer. He is also a forger. For Joyce, the two are synonymous. Ever since Portrait, it has been axiomatic for him that art is forgery. Shem's literary apprenticeship is one and the same as his development as a forger. Perusing other writers' work, he decides to study with stolen fruit how cutely to copy all their various styles of signature, so as one day to utter an epical forged check on the public for his own private profit. The epical check denotes Joyce's own novel, the shady trading zone in which all literature becomes crematized currency. Identity and difference, twin principles of money. That money, every single penny, zloty, dinar, lira, and shekel, must be exactly the same as another and yet different. Money's sameness is constituted through a repetition that makes it distinct, again and again. And Shem and Sean are almost twins. It is suggested that what occurred in the womb was not a splitting of the egg, but rather superfetation, the fertilization of a second egg while the first was already gestating. Doubling mum. Superfetation also means profit, accumulation. As children, they are twin-like, Jimimies. Why do I am a look-alike two poss of porter-peas? The prank queen asks Jarl van Hoother, HCE, as she swaps them for one another under his very nose. This problem of identity versus difference comes to a head in Book 1, Chapter 6, as Sean, Jones, answers his 11th question. Would you give money to an exiled wandering beggar to save his soul? No, replies Sean, Jones, before launching into an elaborate explanation in which time and space are discussed in terms both economic and concerned with principles of equivalence and likeness. In his cash dime speech, Sean, Jones, starts by belittling Bergson, the sophology of Bitchson, Einstein, the woo-woo and wears hairs theoretics of Weinstein, and Proust, who the lost time we had the pleasure we have had our little recherché brush with. They are all temporalists and all Jews, and hence by Diesian association, wanderers, exiles, as is Professor Lévy-Bruhl, Professor Lévy-Bruhl, Professor Lévy-Bruhl, FD of Sexe, Weiman, Eitelnaki, whose work on les mentalités primitives and the experience of the mystical is dispatched on the next pages, by what I have now resolved to call the diamond-cash-diamond fallacy. This preoccupation with time, Sean Jones argues, is solipsistic and sentimental, in another swipe that makes Proust's Madeleine crumble. When Mullookie won the couple of colds, when we were stripping in number 3, I would like the neat drop that would malt in my mouth, but I fail to see when. I am purposely refraining from expounding the obvious fallacy as to the specific gravitates of the two deglutables implied, nor to the lapses liqueur associated with the royal gorge through students of mixed hydrostatics and pneumodipsics will, after some difficulties, grapple away with my Meinungs. Mir din Allower, as old Marcellus Cambrianus puts it, but on Professor Llewellys ap Brillard's FD, PH Doctor's showings, the plea, if he pleads, is all posh and robbage on a melodiontic scale, since his man's when is no other man's quandor. Mine, dank you, while for aught I care for the contrary, that all is where in love as war. Which is to say the following. An intense memory of eating a madeleine does not entitle its author to claim insight into all of human experience. The fact that Proust can hold up his 2 bits, his tiny dime, does not mean that he owns all the world's time. It's thought wealth, for dime is money. In arguing this, Sean Jones claims Shem is a mere cash dime. To this graded intellectual's dime is cash, and the cash system, you must not be allowed to forget that this is all contained, I mean the system, in the dogmarks of Origen on spurios, dogmas of spurious origin, Deutschmarks of dodgy origin, dogmarks, i.e. shit, and Darwin's Origin of Species. Means that I cannot now have or not have a piece of cheaps in your pocket at the same time, and with the same manners as you can now not half or half the cheek a piece I've in mind, unless Burrus and Cassius have not simultaneously systangled themselves, sell dear to sold there, once in the dairy days of by and by. Thus, juggling the questions of likeness, self-sameness, and difference that currency brings into play, Sean refutes Shem's claim to his wealth. It is he, and he alone, who will inherit. One Dubliner will be doubling his mumper, while the other will be doubled with mumps. Sean repeats this claim in Book 3, Chapter 1. There, setting out his own last will in testicle, he spinoozes the fable of the Ont and the grace hoper. Sean reinvents himself as the industrious Ont, a truly anti-Schellingian idealist with a Schelling in Kopfers, whose Romy-built riches contrast strongly with the grace hoper, Shem's, jungle of love and debts. Encountering the grace hoper while he, the Ont, smokes a spatial brunt of Hosanna cigars, he mocks him with what Joyce calls his comfortable philopsopy. Flunky fiddle furloughed fouled, writing off his phony, but Conti Carmi makes the melody that mints the money. Ad majorem 1 SD. Pounds, shillings, pence. Divi gloriam. Divi as in dividend paid in former time by the cooperative society, a share or portion. The gracehoper, Shem, admits defeat, his capitulation also expressed economically. As I once played the piper, I must now pay the count. I pick up your reproof, the horse gift of a friend, for the prize of your save is the price of my spend. He ends, though, with a caveat. As I view by your far look hail yourself to my heel, your genus is worldwide, your space is sublime. But, holy salt martin, why can't you beat time? Shem, gracehopper, down to his last dime, is countering that Sean Ont may inherit space, the seas of the deed. The exiled gracehopper has twicicled, the vicos onto which he's tossed himself. but the time in which the world goes round remains the preserve of the artist. Which of these two claims does Joyce's text prefer? Ultimately, neither. Each time Sean and Shem's battles over inheritance replay themselves, they fade away to be replaced by Isabel, Izzy, Nuvoletta, Margarine. The sons give over to the daughter. And what does the daughter do? Long for the father, his return. I go back to you, my cold father, my cold mad father, my cold mad fiery father. She longs not for the world to come around to her, but for the round to go a world again. 1-2 Mormons more. For the ISA figure, HCE is experienced not as an economic legacy, a fortune or a debt mountain to be inherited, but rather as a gift, an accumulated gift, a donation without return. Till thousands thee. This is how the novel ends, with an invocation of the gift, its recirculation. The last complete sentence in the novel consists of a single word, given. The next phrase tails off, incomplete, unclosed, improper, entailing the verschoot of Finnegan, Earth's solid man, once more, bequeathing one more time his debris, his pecuniary litter, the unconverted currency that makes the round go a world, as gain and loss again.